Television, one of the most influential inventions of all time. Did you know that one of the very first color transmission systems was invented by a Mexican? It was called the chromoscopic adapter for television equipment, and it easily allowed TVs to go from this to this. Mexican TV has some of the funniest moments, but sometimes they can get pretty serious. A good time can become pretty dangerous. And some of the brightest moments become one of the darkest moments. January 25th, 2006. A neighborhood is very busy. Police sirens echo throughout the streets. Neighbors walk outside due to the noise. And a house is the sight of horrors. Wrestling is one of the most popular forms of entertainment around the world, and in Mexico, it's no different. In fact, it's still very popular. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of lucha libre, thanks to wrestlers like Rey Mysterio. Lucha libre is a big part of Mexican culture. And so in 2006, every week, TV Azteca would cover the weekly wrestling show at the Coliseo Arena. For them, this was a special day. The show was great as always, and they were filming the whole thing. However, the channel would always notice a woman in the crowd that stood out from the rest. They noted how she was very calm, stoic, and very muted. And almost every time, she was wearing this bright red dress. So TV Azteca thought it would be a good idea to get in contact with her to set up an interview during one of the shows. She turned out to be a wrestler herself, La Dama del Silencio, the Lady of Silence. Now retired due to a back injury, she still attended wrestling shows to express her love for the ring she once fought in. Planning the interview, TV Azteca seated a mature and older lady next to her, but strangely, the woman refused. So they replaced her with a much younger woman. Now starting the interview, she was asked a couple of questions.
¿Cuánto tiempo tiene viniendo a la lucha?
Bueno, viniendo tengo aproximadamente 10 años, pero aparte de eso me dedico a la lucha libre.
¿Ruda o técnica?
Ruda de corazón.
¿Y dónde es más ruda, aquí o en casa?
Pues en los dos lados.
¿A quién apoyar?
En la casa a los hijos.
¿Y aquí?
Aquí pues a los rudos y al pretendiente.
And that was that. The show ended, and everyone went back to their daily lives. But there was someone out there. A man named Joel Lopez was coming back home from a late shift from work. Typically, his friend would greet him, but he didn't see her. That's when he saw this. He looked up, and there was the killer in front of him. They ran, but they didn't make it very far. The police were luckily patrolling the street. They apprehended and arrested none other than Juana Barraza, aka the Lady of Silence. Juana Barraza wasn't lying. She was indeed a heel. She was a serial killer, dubbed the Old Lady Killer. Juana Barraza is believed to have murdered over 40 elderly women in Mexico from 1998 to 2006, becoming one of the country's most infamous serial killers. At her trial, she was only found guilty of 17 and was given a sentence of 759 years, only having to serve 50. She was born in 1956 in a poor village. Her mother was very abusive to her as she often drank alcohol. At age 12, her mother gave her away in exchange for 3 beers. Her new guardian repeatedly sexually assaulted her, resulting in pregnancy and giving birth to a boy. This led to a deep resentment for her mother and an enormous hatred for older women. Her targets were typically aged 60 and up. She would gain their trust, walk into their house, and generally strangle them with various objects. For many years, she got away with it. Police thought it was either a man, transgender, or a very masculine woman, but thanks to Joel Lopez, the nationwide manhunt came to an end. And so it came to a surprise to everyone that the same woman who was one of the most wanted people in Mexico, with sketches of her face all over the news, turned up on television only a few days earlier for everyone to see. Now, I don't know why she accepted to be in the interview, knowing sketches of her face were all over the news. But I think she wanted to feel strong, mock the country, feel any sort of power, sort of like her fake story. You see, she never once stepped inside of a ring. This famous picture of her was completely fabricated. The Lady of Silence never existed, but the old lady killer did. Looking back now at the interview, it's deeply disturbing knowing that her answers were very influenced by her secret life, describing herself as rude and tough, and her smile, her laugh, hiding her dark secret. August 3rd, 2009. You hear a voice outside your home, disturbing the peace. The voice grows louder and frantic. A few minutes later, you hear police sirens and cars pulling up, but you don't check it out. And then, everything fades, as if it never occurred. Well, that night something did happen, and fortunately for those who missed it, it was live on TV. So you pick up the remote, turn on the TV, and watch the local news. At first, you see a woman in a red shirt. She starts yelling about being imprisoned since 2001 by young and powerful people. She then asks for her freedom. She turns to the hotel staff, accusing them for being in on everything. As police approach her, she begins to get defensive. Then she describes the hospital staff mocking her. Near the end, she starts claiming these people were cannibals. Police grab her and take her into their car. But you didn't really know what happened, or what she was talking about. So you wait a couple days to see if you hear more from this or from her. You find out her name is Gabriela Rico Jimenez, a Mexican model. But that's all you hear from her. Weeks go by, then months, and years. She is never seen or heard from again. Even worse, any trace of her before this video is nowhere to be found, leading to many questions. Who was she before this incident? Were many of her claims true, or was she just crazy? And the most important question, Where is Gabriela? At first, it seems pretty straightforward, but there's a lot more to this story. In the middle of her claims, she mentioned two names. One of them was Carlos Slim. At the time, he was the richest man in the world, which does support her claims of elites and powerful people being behind this. The other name she mentioned was Mourinho. She is talking about a Mexican politician who died in the 2008 Mexico City Learjet crash. The plane crashed into rush hour traffic with no explanation. Mourinho was leading a campaign against Mexican cartels, which, again, people connected to powerful people being behind the whole thing. In 2015, a Spanish blog was in contact with a witness who was there. He said, "At that time, I was in the same place where the girl was taken away after being arrested. I still remember her face, full of despair, fear, anguish. I approached her and asked her some questions. Her name, if she knew where she lived, etc. She told me that we were all already dead, that we were theirs, among other very strange things. That just left me paralyzed. After 20 minutes of being with her, some tall, well-dressed men arrived. They practically took me out of there. I asked why they were doing this, if she was just a poor girl with a mental disorder. They told me that it was none of my business. When I walked away, they stopped me and asked me what she had told me. I answered only crazy things and ran away. The next day, I went to the ministry and I told them about what happened. They just laughed and said, 'Really? She doesn't exist. She never existed, and you don't work here.' By now, it may seem like her claims really do have some truth to them, but they begin to fall apart when you think about it. There is zero evidence of her before this incident. If she was a famous model, like many claim, it would be nearly impossible to completely scrub her off the internet, or at least some people would remember seeing her before, but no one does. The whole testimony could very easily be someone lying and making it all up. It is the internet after all. To add on to this, in 2017, a Mexican news article was published about two people forgetting where they lived. One of them was identified as Gabriela Rico Jimenez. A picture accompanying the article shows a woman with a slight resemblance to the woman in the video if you account for the time passed. All of this shifts the argument to it simply being a person having a mental breakdown live on TV. But with no evidence for any of this, it's all speculation. Whether you think her claims were indeed true or believe she was just mentally unwell, it's still very sad. And I hope she's doing much better now. But for this clip, it will forever remain as a dark moment in Mexican TV. In June of 2008, at around 6 p.m., an estimated 200 police officers descended on News Divine, a nightclub located in Mexico City. The venue had long been the subject of community complaints, accused of selling alcohol and drugs to minors. It had been shut down before for violations, but always seemed to reopen. This time, however, authorities were putting their foot down. A full-blown government operation was formed. Inside, the music was still playing. Young people laughed, danced, and talked. The nightclub allowed access to minors. It was supposedly safe, supposedly alcohol-free. Minutes after the police arrived, the club's owner grabbed the microphone and made an announcement to the crowd. He told everyone that a police inspection was about to begin and reassured them to remain calm. But only minutes later, he went back on the mic. This time, telling patrons to leave the building peacefully in compliance with the operation. What followed was complete chaos. The raid was catastrophically mismanaged from the start. A group of officers entered the club, immediately targeting the youngest-looking attendees and attempting to remove them from the building. Meanwhile, another group of police officers formed a human blockade at the venue's only usable exit in order to prevent minors from escaping. All other doors, including emergency exits, had been locked or sealed off. Making things even worse, the club's main exit was accessible only by a narrow staircase, hardly equipped to handle such a massive flow of people. Inside, the temperature soared, confusion spread, the air became harder to breathe. In the crush of bodies and the frantic attempt to escape, 12 people lost their lives, 9 clubgoers, and 3 police officers, most of them dying from asphyxiation and trauma caused by the crowd surge. The official version, claimed by authorities, claimed that the announcement of the raid sparked panic among the crowd. They said people rushed the exits, causing a stampede in the club's confined, poorly ventilated space. But that wasn't the story everyone told. The moment police burst into the club, they began firing tear gas, screaming, pushing, and beating patrons indiscriminately. As the crowd funneled toward the blocked exit, some women reported being groped by officers. Some people who were detained were forced to strip naked, were touched, and photographed by officers. The government's emergency medical teams on site prioritized their own. Injured civilians were often ignored, while medical attention was directed to the wounded officers. One of the most tragic cases was that of 15-year-old Jennifer Jimenez Martinez. She was exiting an ambulance when the doors had shut behind her, causing her to fall, hitting her head on the pavement, and causing brain damage. Today, she is unable to function independently, relying on her family for everything. Video footage from that day shows officers dragging her, not into another ambulance, but simply leaving her motionless on the ground. The Nooses Divine raid was a failure on every level. It not only exposed the incompetence and brutality of the operation, but also uncovered a complete disregard for human rights. Footage from inside the nightclub was broadcast across Mexico, showing moments from before the panic and the aftermath. In some of the most heartbreaking clips, children and young adults crushed in the crowd, trapped by the stampede, screaming to be let out. Some are seen banging on the walls, desperately trying to escape. It is truly horrible. The tragedy triggered a wave of outrage in Mexico, prompting investigations and demands for justice. Multiple officials faced charges. The nightclub owner, Alfredo Maya Ortiz, was eventually sentenced to nearly 3 decades in prison for corruption of minors. He spent only 14 years in prison before being released on parole. Guillermo Zayas, the commander who oversaw the operation, was arrested and charged with the intentional homicide of 12 people, concluding he could have foreseen the consequences of his poor planning. However, he was released shortly after. In 2016, his charges were reactivated, but then they were exonerated by a judge in 2019, clearing his responsibility. He died in 2023. This is a very upsetting event, and the more you learn about it, the harder it becomes to understand how something like this was allowed to happen. 12 people lost their lives in a place that was supposed to be safe and fun. Of course, there shouldn't have been any alcohol or drugs there, but that was no excuse for the harsh way these people were treated. My heart goes out to all the families and victims of this tragedy. Of a nightclub, not so divine. In the mid to late 2000s, Mexican TV had an iconic duo. They were Oscar Burgos and Jose Cerda. Oscar typically wore a dog costume. The character became famous for the personality he gave the dog, typically acting drunk, clumsy, and being a thief. His partner, Jose Luis Cerda, dressed in stereotypical gangster clothing and acted as such, calling himself La Gata. Jose had a hard life growing up. He was actually a former gang member and drug addict at the age of 10. He went through rehabilitation at age 30, and one day, while working at one of Oscar's comedy clubs, Oscar approached him, noting his gangster-like appearance, and asked him to work with him. That night, a great friendship was born. Together, they appeared on several local television shows before gaining popularity and going on to have their own. It is a fantastic comeback story. Jose managing to turn his life around, bringing smiles to families all across Mexico and appearing at several charity events. But as you all know by now, this is not where this story ends. Cut to March 24th, 2011. Jose and Oscar are finishing a program for one of their shows. As they said goodbye to each other, Jose left with his cousin and a journalist named Luis Ruiz, who had met up with them to interview the duo for their story of recovery and fame. The three of them would walk about a block to Jose's car around 8:30 p.m. Several minutes after they leave, Oscar tries to go into his car to go home, but right before he's about to do so, he is stopped by the security guards of the station. They pull him forcefully back inside and lock him in a room. Oscar didn't know what was going on, so he got angry and kept demanding for them to tell him what had happened. That's when they tell him horrible news. They said someone had just kidnapped Jose and his group. They explained further that Jose had gotten off at a traffic light to take a picture with a fan, but immediately a van showed up and took him and the two others with them. Oscar wouldn't believe the guards. But the night ends, and there are no signs of him anywhere. The next morning, he was found, but not alive, with hands tied to his back and a gunshot wound to his head. Next to him was a note left on the wall, reading, "Stop cooperating with Los Zetas. Signed CDG." News stations picked up the story and broadcasted the corpse of Jose live on TV. An icon and a comedy legend to many was no longer alive. Sometime later, police received reports of the other two bodies around 4 miles away, those being his cousin and Luis. At that same time, a vehicle appeared at the scene with armed men, leaving the news stations confused and police officers at a standstill. That's when the armed men picked up the body and took him away.
Y una playera en color negro también. Se nos está pidiendo, Gregorio, que nos retiremos en estos momentos porque existe riesgo de que, se regrese alguna especie de comando y abra fuego. No sé, desconocemos, pero se nos está pidiendo en estos momentos que nos retiremos de este sitio. Carlos. Vamos a retirarnos y los mantendremos informados. Hasta
gracias, Carlos. Gracias a Carlos Campos que encuentra en el lugar.
10 hours later, they found him once again in an abandoned car. The armed men had left him in a spot where Jose had previously called a march for peace against violence. And that was the end of that story. Tributes from all across the country and a message from his partner spoke highly of him. But what exactly happened for him to become a target? The message left by his murderers was signed by CDG. This was the Gulf Cartel, a rival of Los Zetas, the cartel who was mentioned in the message. But Jose Cerda was no longer a gang member. He had left that world behind. Well, not entirely. As mentioned previously, his character was a stereotype of a gangster. According to news outlets, he often made a hand motion which was associated with Los Zetas. While the exact reason for his murder is not confirmed, this is regarded as the main one. Jose Cerda was an aspiring figure. He had lived at his lowest and rose up to become an amazing person, not only for thousands, but for himself. It is truly tragic what happened to him. Not only appearing once on live TV as a dead body, but twice. And the story becoming one of the darkest moments in Mexican TV. Over the past year, we've gone over 12 unique stories from Mexico. Stories about loss, tragedy, foolishness, or straight up evil. Stories that have almost never left Mexico. But thanks to you guys, I was able to share them for others around the world. Whether you've been here since the first one, its sequel, or this one, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure learning these along with you. And while there might be other ones out there, I think for the most part, I've covered every underlying theme that I could. If you have any stories or topics you would like me to cover, feel free to share them. You can always comment, but you can always send me one through my email or social media, which you can find under every video. I hope you enjoyed the video. Stay safe and take care.